No surprises on the track as athletics powerhouse Kenya names its Beijing-bound team. Hello and a very warm welcome to this week's edition of Match Point, the show that focuses on all things African sport from the continent and beyond. I'm Mahia Mutua. Also coming up in this week's show, Egypt edge out Uganda to qualify for the Under-23 Championships. And we take a look at the impressive Tour de France debut by an African team, MTN Qhubeka. Welcome to the show. Now, there are just 21 days to this year's World Athletics Championships in Beijing, China. And on Saturday, Kenya announced its team to the competition after holding national trials. Many athletes had already attained the qualifying standard from the various international meets, but the two-day competition at home was about ensuring their ticket to the Chinese capital. 1500 meters world champion Asbel Kiprop eased to victory over the distance, clocking 3 minutes 34.05 seconds. Silas Kiplagat was second, with Elijah Motonei third. Commonwealth champion Faith Chepngetich won the women's race. Olympic and world steeplechase champion Ezekiel Kemboi finished fourth, but his place in Beijing was already assured. Jairus Birech won the race as Concelsus Kipruto finished second, while 2008 Olympic champion Brimin Kipruto was third. Javelin sensation Julius Yego was also a winner as the men's 800 meters provided the shock result of the day, with David Rudisha losing his first senior race on Kenyan soil. Ferguson Rotich won the race in 1 minute 43.60 seconds, while Alfred Kipketer was third. Kenya named a team of 45 athletes.
It's a good motivation, but I just felt like let me just make the team. That was most important, and then prepare.
I just wanted to run to make my fans happy at home, so I just came to run, and that's why you saw I was just pushing my boys to make good, and then maybe in Beijing we'll make good results.
My prayer, of course, as I go for the World Championship is to come out as the winner, and that's my main thing now. I'm really looking forward for the World Championship finals, and making it to the final, and now in the final you give it, and if I hit it right, of course, I know I can win.
It's good to make the team. It's good to be part of the Kenyan team, actually, to be there with Eunice. It's so good for me. I really enjoy staying with her, running with her. She keeps me moving, actually, and I used to encourage her. Now she's encouraging me.
Now, joining us live in studio is CCTV Celestine Karone, who was at the national trials at the Kasarani's complex here in Nairobi. Now, Celestine, obviously people have been waiting for these trials. What would you say were some of the highlights, and what were there any surprises?
I think, Mahia, like that previous package said, Rudisha's defeat at home for the first time as a senior was the one thing that took very many people by surprise. Then again, it was not very surprising because this is an athlete who has struggled to show the kind of form that he had back in 2012 when he broke the Olympic broke the world record while on his way to winning his first Olympic gold medal. And speaking to his coach earlier, I actually had a chance to chat with him, and his coach actually told me that he is concerned that Rudisha isn't mentally strong. After recovering from that career-threatening injury back in 2013, Rudisha has been unable to show that kind of form, and his coach feels that it is more a mental than a physical problem, because physically he is actually very fine. But I mean, beyond that, some of the highlights for me were the returning athletes. We have a number of athletes who have been named in that team who are former world champions. We spoke about Brimin Kipruto, a 2007 world champion, 2008 Olympic champion. He is back in the team for the first time in 2 years. So that gives the 3,000 meters steeplechase a very good feel, because you have two senior athletes in Brimin and Ezekiel Kemboi, and then you have two young athletes in Consensus and Jairus, which is a very good mix. And also Vivian Cheriot, let us remember, she is returning from maternity leave and will be competing for the first time since 2012 the Olympic Games, where she won silver. And so I think we will be keen to see how these senior athletes do perform, of course, as Kenya is actually also looking at this as a moment where these senior athletes are moving on and the junior athletes should be coming up, Mahia.
All right, so we do now know the 45 that will be traveling to Beijing. The team has indeed been selected, but who would you say, Celeste, are some of the athletes who will pose a big threat to the Kenyan runners?
Well, you see, many coaches in Kenya, Mahe, usually refuse to say that we are looking at who will pose a threat to us when we go to competitions outside. I mean, but that said and done, when you look at the Diamond League this season, you are looking at athletes like Genzebe Dibaba and Almaz Ayana of Ethiopia in the 5,000 meters. These are two athletes who have dominated the 12-lap race, and it really is hard to see that there's anyone who would challenge them. Everybody is talking about them going for that gold and silver in that 5,000 meter race. You're looking at an athlete like Mo Farah. He has continued to show that the double Olympic and double world titles that he has are not a fluke. He has actually worked for them and is consistent in his performances, as we saw in the Diamond League races, despite the problems he's been having with his coach being accused of having doping, being caught in a doping scandal. So I think Mo Farah remains a big threat in the long distances for Kenya. You have an athlete like from Ethiopia who remain a big threat as well for Kenyan athletes in the long distances as well. But I mean, Kenya also has its own fair share of athletes who have been doing well. Unisum, Asbel Kiprop, Ezekiel Kemboy, these are defending world champions who people expect that they will retain their title.
Finally, Celestine, obviously you've been to Beijing, you've covered events at the world-famous Bird's Nest. What is your take on the Worlds at this iconic venue, and is there some motivation for athletes who've been there before to return for the Worlds this time round?
I think that is the biggest talking point going into Beijing, Mahia, the iconic Bird's Nest. For many of these athletes, memories were made there in 2008 in the Olympic Games. I mean, when you look at how Kenya performed in that Olympic Games, it was the best ever to date. And so everybody will be thinking, well, maybe there's a magic with China, maybe there's a magic with the Bird's Nest. And so that is something people, of course, are really looking at and thinking, yes, it will be a motivation for Team Kenya. And so I think not just Kenya, really, all over the world, you're looking at that was the place where someone like Usain Bolt, the Jamaican multiple world and Olympic champion, actually got exposed to the world. The world stood up and noticed that Usain Bolt does exist. And so for an athlete like Usain Bolt, returning to the Bird's Nest will be the best thing that can ever happen to him. He's thinking, well, this was where I started. This is where I should continue to move on. And so for many athletes, it holds a special place in their heart. And we know what that means for sport. It means motivation, Maya. So we really do hope that there will be at least some world records and some good performances.
All right, Celestine, all will be answered in just over 20 days' time when the Worlds get underway in Beijing. That was CCTV's Celestine Karane joining us live in studio here in Nairobi. Moving on with more youth engaging in sporting activities on the African continent, Isabelle Yakubu, a professional female basketball player based in France, has kick-started a youth basketball academy project in Cotonou, Benin. The project is aimed at identifying and nurturing talent among young boys and girls in the West African country. Here is Leslie Mirungu with that report.
Here in the town of Cotonou in Benin, a match between two female teams is taking place. This was the idea of France-based Olympic medalist Isabelle Yakubu as part of efforts to highlight some of the talented young basketballers in her motherland.
It's a project that starts this time with a weekend of basketball. It's a discovery to remind people that basketball is also played in Benin by both males and females.
The 29-year-old hopes for investment into her project, as this will help in the development of basketball academies as part of her future plans.
Next year, we will start with a basketball camp with European coaches who will come and interact with coaches from here. We will also try and have some members of the team brokers to come because demand for them is very high. We will try, we're not promising anything, and in the coming years we'll move on to academies, and again for that we need funds.
Africa has seen a growing interest in continental basketball by private investors, with companies such as Zuku, a pay-TV content provider, investing heavily on university leagues in East Africa. Leslie Marungu, CCTV.
All right, let's take a quick break here on Match Point, but there's plenty more still to come, including Egypt edge out Uganda to qualify for the Under-23 Championship. Welcome back. Now, Egypt has qualified for the Under-23 Africa Championships after knocking out Uganda. The North Africans beat Uganda 2-1 in their return leg fixture to advance 6-1 on aggregate. Leon Senyange now reports.
Post were yet again no match for the North African giants. Egypt carried a 4-0 advantage into the second leg and needed only a draw to advance. But it's the host Uganda that got onto the back foot early on. Abdel Mustafa stealing the ball in the middle to find Mahmoud Suleiman. He made no mistake with his attempt as the visitors took an early lead after 10 minutes. Uganda should have leveled the score, but Mossad Awad was well placed to stop Yunus Sentamu's attempt. Later in the second half, the scoreline and aggregate got even bigger for Uganda to chase as the North Africans got their second goal. Ahmed Soleimani tapped in after a good run from Ramadan Ahmed that put the aggregate at 6-0. Uganda pulled out something of a consolation when Farouk Mir stabbed the ball past Mossad Awad. That was not enough, though, to bring the hosts back into the game. Egypt winning this one 6-1 on aggregate.
Despite trying the best, our players, the best, is still not enough to reach the level on which Egypt is at present. Yes, we can play, but we need to be much more competitive. Competitive in what point? When chances are coming, we need to use it.
Of course, our objective to qualify for Brazil, and this is the main target. We will do our best and we'll work hard, and we'll see what will happen there.
The North African side now joins Senegal and Algeria for the Under-23 Africa Championship that will be played later in December. Uganda will now turn their focus to qualification for the African Nation Championships. Leon Sanyange, CCTV, Kampala.
Turning to club football now, in last week's Confederations Cup match between Egypt's Zamalek and Congo's AC Leopards, striker Rudi Ndeye was severely injured. Egyptian military doctors said the captain's surgery was a success. But while Ndeye is being treated in one of the best hospitals in Egypt, many other football players do not have access to medical facilities. Adel Mahroui tells us more about the players' welfare.
A beautiful game indeed. But sometimes the consequences on the pitch can be dire. Rudi Ndeye's injury last week has shocked both AC Leopards and El Zamalek. Fortunately for Ndeye, he got the top-notch medical care with the host facilitating his surgery.
The medical service which introduced for these athletes is very advanced and very rapid. The surgical maneuvers, and this, as I told you, is very advanced in Egypt. We have very pioneer, very elite surgeon do this operation very successfully, and the athletes can return back to play again without any complication.
The Egyptian Armed Forces is paying for his treatment in its newest hospital dedicated to Air Force officers. But Ndeye's injury has revived concerns on the poor health care many African players receive.
Healthcare barely exists in Africa, and it's a big conflict. In the case of a Leopards player, he could lose his football career with a full body paralysis, and he might not be able to find any other job or pay for his medical expenses. For the clubs, players are investments, and with injuries they might lose that. But also, they want to spend £10 on a player and sell him for £100.
For many clubs, paying for insurance or medical cover would make a player cost the club more and therefore decrease its margin of profit. On the other hand, there are no strict regulations that compel clubs to provide health insurance for their players.
Africa is poor. CAF has not imposed regulations on clubs, forcing them to get doctors for players during all matches or even get them health insurance. It is expensive, and because of the poor financial situation of most African countries, CAF cannot take this step.
And even if CAF takes such decisions, the level of medical facilities available in most African countries are not up to standard. To give players proper medical care, some clubs must pay extra to treat their players abroad. Take, for example, last year, Al Ahly of Egypt had 2 players with knee injuries. The popular footballer was sent to Spain, and the other one, well, he received his treatment in Egypt. Talk of double standards in a game whose motto is fair play. Despite his critical condition, many believe Rudy Ndeye is lucky to find such advanced medical treatment that he is receiving, something most African players cannot access. And unless the football continental body CAF steps in with regulations, more players could find themselves injured like Leopard striker. And that could likely spell doom to their careers. Adel Mahroui, CCTV, Cairo.
Algerian football clubs have been banned from signing foreign players. Algeria's Football Federation announced the rule early last week, citing a severe financial crisis caused by a plunge in oil revenues. Algeria's oil export revenue has almost halved so far this year, crippling the economy of the North African nation, whose oil sales account for more than 95% of export revenues. The Football Federation said the slump has created a difficult financial situation in Algeria, which can no longer legally obtain currency to pay the salaries of foreign players. The Federation said the decision was immediate, but added that football players who have already signed to play with Algerian clubs will be allowed to continue until their contracts expire. All right, now joining us for more on the situation in Egypt and North Africa is CCTV's Adel El Mahroui. First, Adel, Zamalek win in the first complete season after 2 years. Is it safe to say that they've bounced back?
Well, Al Zamalek is definitely back on the scenes. It has won last year's Egyptian Cup, and it broke an 11 years long drought or a dry spell on winning any Egyptian Premier League title. It seems that it has regained its strength. Zamalek has been seeming quite strong after the election of its new management about over a year ago, through which the new management have quickly regained and restructured the financial status of the club itself, managing to get many players. The Zamalek in the last transfer window was the biggest club signing contracts, with about 15 new players introduced. So it was a well-deserved season for Al Zamalek, even way before the league seemed to be tending, or Al Zamalek seemed to be sealing the title in its favor. Many were speculating that Al Zamalek will definitely be in a different position this year. So the White Castle fans have been celebrating. As you see, it's a historic moment for them to see the club regaining its strength in the Premier League, which has a very particular taste for football fans here.
Now, Adel, going back to that previous story about the injury surrounding Rudy Ndeye, what can other countries learn from Zamalek and Egypt on looking after players' welfare?
Well, Al Zamalek, before even the Egyptian Armed Forces announced that it will take care of the expenses of Ndeye's medical condition, Al Zamalek have stepped up, saying it was the host and it was just part of the sportsmanship of the club is to take care of the expenses regardless to what happened. There wasn't any penalties, any fouls against Al Zamalek in the tackle that we've seen in the previous package, but still it has sort of a moral responsibility of hosting the Leopards here, and they must take care of them fully. This has been the perspective of them. But overall, there are many concerns about players' welfare. Not far away ago, about 3 or 4 months ago, not in the Premier League, but in classes in different leagues in Egypt, there was a player in one of particular clubs who had cancer, and because it's a poor club, his salary couldn't pay for the financial expenses or the medical expenses for cancer treatment, and a delay in the procedures of the Egyptian Football Federation, who promised to take care of his expenses. This delay, well, he couldn't have waited, and unfortunately he passed away, causing a lot of anger and fear at the same time among his colleagues. The health status, even in Egypt, which has very good medical facilities, of course that's relatively to Africa, but at the same time there are many clubs who are far from reaching such medical facilities. So there is sort of a movement. It's not very strong and it's not still apparent, but at least there are some people who try to protest at the Egyptian Football Federation, and now we're seeing Ndeye's case is trying to alarm many football clubs, trying to reach particular players, many football players, trying now to see whether the CAF will step up and take the responsibility, try to put pressure on the clubs, but at the same time, the financial status of the club is always a big question, which, if the CAF takes this decision, the critics would say that this would put many clubs under financial constraints and therefore would seize their capability or hinder their capability to move forward, forcing many clubs to shut down. So it's a very complicated situation, but there must be something done, at least from a rights perspective, for these players.
Finally, Adele, quite quickly, we have heard, still on the same vein of player welfare, talking about Algeria, and they have, of course, banned clubs from signing foreign players. What exactly does the law say in Egypt with regards to foreign players there?
Well, in Egypt there are no restrictions in specific recruitment of players. Any nationalities are allowed. The numbers might be sort of a regulation. It depends on the club and how the federation sees every particular case in the club. So it might be that the federation might interfere in terms of the quota of the clubs if they have the foreign players exceed a certain percentage of the entire players. But there isn't a direct restrictions on that either. I mean, in terms of legal legislations or the laws that regulate the Egyptian Federation. But Algeria's case is quite an incident, because it marks something that many countries, particularly in North Africa, have been seeing, who depend on tourism in particular and some oil revenues, is that to pay for foreign players or coaches, they need foreign currency. And in Algeria's case, the federation is the main locator for the foreign currency, and it doesn't want to go to the black market. It needs official resources or official ways, legal ways, to buy the foreign currency. Here in Egypt, however, the clubs are responsible for that, and that's why it hasn't been quite significant, or the similar incident of allocating foreign currency in Algeria, which drove the federation to take the decision, has not been quite significant in Egypt. So more or less Egypt seems unaffected, and it seems that this will be the case for quite some time.
All right, Adele, thank you very much for that update. We'll leave it there for now. That was CCTV's Adele Mahroui joining us live from Cairo. Well, turning now to cycling, team MTN Qhubeka made history in July by becoming the first African team to start the Tour de France. The team then exceeded the African continent's expectations by winning a stage and by having one of its riders wear the race's polka dot jersey before finishing 5th overall. Team principal Douglas Ryder believes this is only the beginning for the team and for future cycling stars from Africa, as CS Duplessis now reports.
Team MTN Qhubeka captured the imagination of cycling fans across the world as the first ever team from Africa started the iconic Tour de France and not only competed but also grabbed headlines for all the right reasons in only their second Grand Tour race. Team principal Douglas Ryder says he had to pinch himself on the first day of the historic race.
The first day when the Tour de France comes to us and says, would you guys like to open the 2015 Tour de France with one of your riders as the first ever African team? And it was a time trial, and Daniel Tekla-Heimanot had just won the Eritrean National Time Trial Championship. So, you know, he had his Eritrean flag on his time trial suit, and we were like, wow, imagine him opening the time trial and opening the 2015 Tour de France. And so that happened, and yeah, and then a couple of days later, he wears the King of the Mountains jersey, first ever African rider to wear the polka dot jersey in a Grand Tour and in the Tour de France. Then we win a stage. Yeah, I mean, every day we were like, I mean, is this really happening? You know, it was, and the energy and the vibe in the team, as you can imagine, it was just at such a high level, and yeah, it just continued as every day went on. It was just, yeah, it was like, this is honestly a dream come true for this whole team.
The stage 14 victory for the team's rider, Steve Cummings, holds a special place in riders' heart, especially that the momentous occasion happened on Mandela Day.
We had a meeting the stage before, or the morning before the stage, and spoke about the importance of Mandela Day, you know, him as a person, what he did for South Africa and the rest of the world, and you could see the riders were deeply inspired by that. And I actually, after that team meeting, looking at the riders, I felt sorry for any team that raced us that day. You know, it was really incredible in terms of, you can feel the energy in the team bus, and it was always a plan for Steve to do well in that stage, and it was a stage that we felt was suitable for him. He's a good climber, not a great climber, but an incredible time trialist, and yeah, I mean, he was in the breakaway, which was already the first victory, and then it was really good riders in that breakaway. So we were like thinking, you know, is it possible, and when should he go? And he knew the climb at the finish. We prepared the finish. We knew what it was going to be like coming onto the airstrip. And yeah, he just timed it to perfection, had lots of faith in his ability, and then went on and won the stage.
Ryder explains there's still a long way to go this season with the team preparing for the Vuelta a España, but he maintains 2016 will be a massive year for the fledgling team.
We're riding our second Grand Tour for the year, which is incredible. We're riding the Tour of Spain, Vuelta a España, starting at the end of August. We're going to make some nice surprises, I think, in that tour, potentially putting in a black South African rider, which is the first time ever that'll happen for South African cycling and for any Grand Tour. So that's really exciting to move the potential of African and South African cycling forward again. And we want to get more riders the opportunity to race Grand Tours. You change as a rider if you race a 3-week stage race like that. You have much more depth and breadth in you as a person and as a bike rider. And so, you know, I think 2016 is going to be a massive year for this team.
The sky is the limit for Team MTN Qhubeka after an incredible performance at the Tour de France this year where they exceeded all expectations. It's resulted in a Giro d'Italia entry already, and the future is bright for Doug Ryder and his team, who continue to grow from strength to strength, as well as doing cycling on the continent extremely proud. CS du Plessis, CCTV, Johannesburg.
Well, still on African cycling, finally, David Kinja, the first coach of two-time Tour de France winner Chris Froome, has spoken about the attributes the Kenyan-born British cyclist has used on his road to success. Kinja believes Froome's determination and fighting spirit are what have set him apart from the pack and called on African cyclists to be better managed. Kinja, who trains outside his home in Kikuyu on the outskirts of the Kenyan capital Nairobi, made history as the first black African rider to sign for a European cycling team. He was also Froome's first coach, having first met the professional cyclist back in 1999. Speaking in reference to the MTN Qhubeka team, Kinja called on better management for African teams as they work to improve standards.
Chris Froome is a fighter. He's the kind of guy who knows not how to give up. He goes out knowing what he wants to do, and he falls down and stands up, and he doesn't quit. He keeps on going forward until he achieves what he wants. He's the guy who went out there and said, I need to see black African cyclists, and he believes there's talent out there. He only needs to manage these people well. He knows the problems of Africa, and he goes out there, he sets up the Qhubeka, and now we see the results.
Well, that's it for this week's edition of Matchpoint. Remember, you can send your feedback to matchpoint@cctv.com. You can also visit our Facebook page, CCTV Africa, or stay in touch on Twitter. The handle, as always, is CCTV News Africa. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again same time next week.